May the face of the Lord shine on you. May He shower His blessing on all that you do. May you never know anguish, sorrow, or strife. Dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of your life.
My name is Broccoli Moore. I'm here. I'm retired out of the military here at Fort Hood. I got involved with the community dealing with anger and depression when I experienced and seen some of the things that I went through in my younger life that when I was coming up. I'm from Montgomery, Alabama. I was raised by the Roman Catholic Church in an orphanage for 3 years by some Roman Catholic nuns. And we had a peaceful relationship, and they showed me a lot of things. And one of the nuns that I draw real close to, she realized that I had a lot of anger. How I arrived at the foster home during those 3 years of my time in my life, my mother was 50 years old when I was born. I'm the baby of 12. She got paralyzed. The medical service that they have now for women having kids at a later age wasn't there at that time. And she was paralyzed. And at that time, the state took me and my younger sister out of the household because they didn't feel that my mom could take care of us. And all these years, I just grew up with all this anger. And eventually, I graduated from high school, and my mom, she got better, and she never was able to walk again before her death. But I had relationship with my brother and sister, but none of them was strong enough to take me and my sisters out of the environment that we had been put in. We was never mistreated, but I had this bottled up anger because I wondered why good things and bad things, and why bad things happen to good people. And we were just a normal family, and I grew up with all this anger, and it was just bottlenecking inside of me. And in my tour in the military, I seen a lot of people had went through and go through a lot of anger and depression. But it wasn't until that I realized, going back and forth visiting the sisters back in Alabama, that she talked to me. She said, Broccoli, she said, you know what's wrong with you? And I said, what, sister? And she said, you haven't accepted Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. You have to release your anger. You have to release yourself and forget about the past. And once I did that, my whole life started changing. A year later, I got married. I have 4 kids, lovely wife, been married 20-some years. But in my tour in the military and being stationed here back and forth to Germany and on deployments, I seen so many people and so many fellow soldiers bottled with anger. And that anger came from many different facets of their life. Some of them was in foster homes, someone was child abuse, someone was mistreated, someone was separated from their family, raised by their grandparent, who knows? But in order to get that anger and resolve yourself, to have peace within yourself, you have to have a soul being within yourself. And I found that soul being as Jesus Christ. And once I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, I went to work. And I had to start showing people how happy I was, because I was a very shy, mild-mannered person. Because I was so angry, I would pop off in a minute. Even in my military career, I got in trouble many times for my anger, so I just shut down. I shut down and I didn't talk to anyone. I was to myself. But as I went through different community groups and joined other groups that dealt with anger, and went to school and continued my college education dealing with anger classes, I realized that I was put on earth for a reason, to help other people to deal with their anger situation. And I found this organization called ACT in Bell County, and I work with several other organizations, and I'm very involved in my church, helping young people deal with anger. I don't care what kind of problem you have or whatever you're going through to make you angry. If you can just accept what has happened and put it behind you, and accept whoever you serve, Jesus Christ, whoever, as your soul being, it will make you whole.
Howdy, I'm Sue Ellen Jackson, and this is Aware Central Texas Effects of Child Abuse and Neglect. You just heard from Mr. Broccoli Moore, and he was talking about how anger has impacted his life, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So go grab a cup of coffee, iced tea, come sit with us. We're going to be talking about anger today, and I have with me a very special guest, Mr. Gary Mervin. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you.
You and I were talking earlier. Big topic, squeezing into a few minutes. So we're going to do our best to illustrate some things about anger. Gary, why are you here today?
Well, I am really good at being an angry person, and I've worked with a lot of angry people professionally over the years.
Right.
So this is my line of work. I'm a consultant. I work with military families,
Right.
and have been trained in this area.
So when you were hearing Broccoli talk about stuffing in the anger, but then it would come out in angry outbursts, you're a professional person that has seen that in the military a
Yes.
lot.
Yes. Yeah, what happens in those kinds of situations is there's a central nervous system response. I know a lot of people say I'm defective perhaps, but what's happening is there is a low-lying sense of stress, very thin membrane, because of the way that the person in the setting, in their environment, you guys have talked about this on another occasion, where a person is in an environment, they grow up several years as they're developing in their brain development, they tend toward the adrenaline branches, the adrenaline valves.
Is that connected with anger, adrenaline?
I'm sorry, yes. Actually, if you were going to boil it down to one word, anger is adrenaline, tension is adrenaline, stress is adrenaline.
I never thought about it like that.
That's what it is. And when it's chronic, then it comes along with a package of other chemicals, cortisol, for example, that are, well, really they're toxic to the central nervous system.
I never thought about it like that. So a very simple illustration might be a boiling teapot, you know, that...
I would say it would be, yes, that would be a good thing. You know how we drive, the human body really adapts. So we're in this low-level state of stress. It doesn't take much.
So we're simmering.
Yes. And so a person who has that kind of a propensity because of the setting that was not responsive, it was not experienced as safe, it was not secure, it was harsh and chaotic,
Right.
that person is inclined to be simmering all the time, and it's what we call them short fuse people.
Right. So they're going to erupt at various times.
Right.
And not only are they carrying this simmering thing, when they erupt, now they're affecting the people around them.
Yes.
And if you're a child and you live in a household where there are people that have got this chronic anger that has never been dealt with, they're going to feel the impact of it. And does that teach them how to become angry people too?
Actually, it is a model. It's not so much teaching, it is crafting, it's sculpting, because the brain development of a child isn't complete enough for there to be this understanding of what's going on.
Okay, so they're still in the development.
However, the personhood inside is. And so the personhood inside, you know, we're born with us. We're there. And
kind
so
of our built-in chip.
Well, it's our spirit. It's our personhood.
Yes.
So that senses what the level of tension is in either hearing it or upon them.
We're going to have to move forward. I know this is a very interesting conversation.
Yes.
And I wish we had hours and hours to talk about this with you. We're going to take another look at something that's involved around anger and how it was an impact. So let's hear from someone else.
My name is Rick, and I'm retired from another state's Department of Corrections, and I was going to share a story with you about anger in the workplace. As you can imagine, most inmates are angry, and most inmates are frustrated, and most inmates are scared, and it seems to me that those emotions are pretty tied up together. Well, at one of the institutions, we had a bunch of inmates that were very frustrated and angry, and they had a riot, and they started some fires and they made it very difficult for the officers to regain control of the institution. But the officers had to do that for the safety of all the inmates and themselves, of course. And one of the things that the inmates did was, for example, they tied sheets around the cell doors so that the doors couldn't be opened, so that the officers couldn't evacuate them to save them from the smoke inhalation. So after the disturbance was quelled, some of the officers, probably some of the newer officers, sat around and kind of debriefed and kind of tried to relax a little bit. And of course, in the institution there are no weapons. There's just a weapon between your ears. And so it was probably a pretty frightening experience for everybody involved. And what happened, though, was at the end of the disturbance, the officers got together, and instead of relying on the institutional rules and regulations to deal with the outcome of this thing, they got angry. And they got angry because, in my opinion, because they were brought to great heights of fear and frustration for not being able to control the situation. And then the anger came out. And a few of the officers decided to get even with who they thought were the ringleaders of this disturbance. And they did. And they were later charged and convicted and sentenced to federal prison for violating the inmates' constitutional rights. These were good men, well-trained men. They let their anger and their frustration and their fear get the better of them at that time. It would have been better to have prayed together as a group, but they didn't. And as a result, lives were changed. These gentlemen did pretty large sentences. They were sentenced to quite a few years. So to me, that's an example of how fear and frustration and anger are interrelated. And in the correctional setting, that is a constant, those are constant emotions.
You just heard from Rick Woodard, who was working in the prison system and was surrounded regularly by this baseline anger. We make choices, don't we?
Yes, we do.
And do the choices have anything to do, I know, oh, there's just so much to talk about with this, but when you're talking about anger, there's also that impulse. And is that, we talked earlier about the baseline,
the simmering,
and then it escalates, and then it becomes an eruption kind of a thing. If that particular group of officers who became fearful and angry, if they had come together and processed that in a different way, they could have very well had a different outcome. Do we have any understanding of why that particular group of men in that particular time, as officers responsible for the care of those inmates, is there any research or is there any understanding of why at that particular moment those men chose to actually retaliate, is what I'm guessing. You know, they probably went back to the inmates and did physical damage to them, is what I'm guessing. So how can something like that happen when you have a group? Why wasn't there one person that made the positive decision?
Well, it's very tough to answer definitively because only those people who do those things ultimately know their motivation.
Yeah.
At the same time, there must be literature out there that specifically targets and researches the areas of corrections and prison systems.
Right.
Okay, I'm not aware of that, but I am aware of generally anger is prompted by the response of the central nervous system because the threat of the personhood. And so what's going on is the brain is not going to be in the forebrain, which is where we have our thoughts, inhibitions, where we interpret what's actually dangerous. To the proportion of adrenaline we experience, we're in this midbrain, which is the emotional brain. Therefore, our inhibitions are, well, they're diminished. So
Right.
we'll make decisions that we would not normally do if we were in our right mind.
Yeah, that's just amazing. I mean, there's just so much to think about in terms of anger and how it affects and impacts and how
And they're
we
in that
inherit.
environment all the time, where
Right.
there's a level of fear involved in their job. It's inherent.
You know, for example, I was driving to work this morning and somebody pulled out in front of me. And I wanted to tailgate him. So I'm like, you pulled out in front of me, you shouldn't have done that, and now I'm gonna punish you. And really, that was a real struggle
That's
for
fight
me.
or flight.
Is it?
That's the adrenaline prepping us to neutralize a threat, to protect our family, our
Right.
loved ones, or to remove our loved ones from the threat by fleeing. And there's also the freezing part too. It doesn't rhyme so good, so we usually shorten it to fight or flight.
Yeah. You know, there's just so much to think about with this. You know, we're going to hear from one more lady, one more person who's a lady, and she has a brother who was shaken as an infant. And we're going to hear from her and have her tell us how it's impacted her and her family, you know, for all these years. So let's hear from Alex.
I'm Alexandria Ackworth. I'm the sister of Carson. He, at 11 weeks old, was shaken. At the time, I was 7 years old, and it's amazing how child abuse doesn't just affect the person that is abused. It affects the whole family, siblings, just your daily life. Being a big sister, you're so excited that your brother is here and you're a big sister and all the responsibility that you have with that. At 11 weeks old, he was shaken, and you think on the car ride to the hospital that he's gonna die, and you ask your mom, are we not gonna have Carson anymore? He spent 3 months in the hospital in the intensive care unit, and I had to stay with a family friend during that time and be watched by relatives. My mom at the time had just started her own salon, so she had to constantly be at the hospital with my brother. She also had to be at her job working double shifts just to cover expenses with Carson's expense in the hospital. And then when we finally were able to bring him home, the nursing expense that went along with that. Private care is extremely expensive, and when you start out a new business, you just have to work so hard to take care of your family, and that's exactly what my mom did. She tried to shelter so much, but your whole life drastically changes when a child is shaken. Not only was he shaken, but we kept the father out of jail by some laws that were changed due to Carson's case. Everything around that was wrapped around him staying out of jail so that he could pay for what he did financially. Going to jail allows the taxpayers to pay for somebody to sit there, and it was his duty to Carson to pay for what he did financially, pay for the nursing care, the hospital bills, the doctor visits all the time. And you go through so much debt because of how much you have to pay, or how this has occurred because of the child abuse. Child abuse and shaken baby syndrome is caused out of anger, and it should not happen at all. That's why we have such great organizations, Aware Central Texas, that shows how not to shake a child and how not to become so angry that you inflict violence upon somebody. It has affected me. It's just very emotional. I think that you don't quite always get over it. And, you know, Carson was only supposed to live to 4 years old. He's now going to be 18 in March. Wheelchair bound, always has nurses at home coming there to teach him from schools. He'll graduate when he's 21, and you know, it's not just, yes, he's succeeded that way, but it's all due to my mom keeping him home and keeping the wonderful care that we have in nursing. But the effect on that is my mom and I had to completely adjust, take off our shoes. I couldn't yell in the house. I had to wear socks. He would constantly scream, cry, and it's not like anything you've ever heard. It's not just a normal newborn baby crying. It's shrieking. And dealing with that when you're 7 years old, you don't really know how to adjust to doing that. And you can't invite friends over because they're loud, and you're 7 years old, and you're loud as it is. So that would wake up Carson. My mom has slept on a couch for, I can't remember the last time she slept in a bed. Probably when I was 9 years old. I'm now 24, so she slept on a couch for that entire time, listening to him breathe, listening to make sure he's still alive at night. And it's a constant worry, a constant fear that he's never going to be there and he's never going to make it. So it's just affected that part of my life, affected my mom greatly. And we're in the process of going to be writing a book about Carson and our story to share with everyone so that we can make an impact and hopefully prevent somebody else from doing the same.
You just heard from a young lady who has been suffering with the effects of anger nearly her whole entire life. You know, I was just telling Gary that this is probably one of the hardest shows that we've ever done because anger is such a huge topic and we're trying to squeeze it into just a few minutes. You've heard from 3 different people in totally different places in their lives who were impacted by anger. And what that tells me, and something we already know, is that we all have to deal with anger. We all have to. And if we're parents or if we're family members and we lash out in anger, we're hurting the people around us. It creates quite a ripple effect. And maybe a good way to sum it up, Gary, would be to talk about how do we avoid those negative outbursts when we're dealing with chronic anger? How can we avoid those things? How do we deal with anger?
Thanks for the question. That's usually the big question.
Right.
Because of the propensity that people who have a short fuse,
right,
because of that propensity to really pop a top easily, I know this is going to sound rather hokey, at the same time hang in there with me, monitoring the self and accepting that I am a person of a short fuse and I see things that are not good for me. I see that this is going to cause me anger and I try a plan B. I release my creative juices as opposed to going in the middle of it and pretending it's not bothering me.
So the first step would be, if you suspect you're a person that has issues with anger, you are a person that has issues with anger, and be aware of that?
Well, usually other people tell us more than we would know it ourselves.
Okay, so if people around you are telling you you have anger issues, don't bow up, just accept that. Deal with it. That's number one.
Well,
Not to condemn yourself or to get mad at yourself, but just be aware of the fact that you are a person that has what we've referred to as a short fuse. And then the second step would be to learn how to put things in place that will cause you to not act out because of your anger and create negative consequences for yourself and people around you, right?
Well, if you don't mind, with all due respect, what I'd like to say is the things that we're talking about are among many, and we don't have enough
Okay.
time to go through them. So
Right.
please know that as a priority, if I was sitting with someone, I would talk
Right.
to them about a wide variety. And
Okay.
so this is not number one.
This is a very condensed.
Right.
Okay.
Right. One of the main things, one of the most effective predictors of developing a chronic stress or anger issue is
Right.
a lack of social support. So
Really?
yes. So
Okay.
social support, developing that social support is vital. And then including family support. And another very, very strong correlation of this chronic anger is developing a person who has a negative self-identity. And so when a person is changing that on purpose, then that goes a long way toward them healing and going to where as good as it can be.
So basically, a good, very condensed tidbit of advice. If you're a person that has issues with anger, don't isolate. And you know, Broccoli talked about that. He said, I
Right.
just withdrew. And he withdrew because of the anger. Don't do that. Surround yourself with positive people if you can. And if you don't believe that you can do that, call us at Aware Central Texas. The number is 254-939-7582. We'd love to talk to you at great length about the many facets of anger. We are running out of time. And I want to thank you, Gary, for coming. And let's do lunch so we can finish this conversation, because it's a very enlightening thing to know that you're not the only angry person out there, or your loved one is not the only angry person out there, and there is help. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
May the face of the Lord shine on you. May He shower His blessing on all that you do. May you never know anguish, sorrow, or strife. Dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of your life.